from the Farm Fungi. I'm here live with Michael Heim from Enzo Farm and Forage. So he is an expert forager, but before we get started here and as some more people start to join in, I just wanted to recap. Last week we had a plate of this Agricide Parasitica. So you can see that it's starting to grow really nicely on grains. I'm pretty excited for this new strain. I came from New Zealand, so this is going to be our first test batch. So hey guys, welcome to Fungi Friday. If you guys can hear us, give us a thumbs up. I don't know if our audio is coming through, but I just like to do a double check. So if you guys can hear us, give us a thumbs up. What's up, guys? All right, I hope it's coming through.
Yeah, great.
All right, so
first one.
So if you want to give a little background on, yourself, yeah, we got a thumbs up, so sound's coming in good. Thank you, Chili Dog. All right.
That's good.
Cool.
And Bosco, thanks,
All right.
Bosco.
So a little bit delayed, but that's okay. So if you want to take it over for a minute and kind of explain your background and what your plans are and,
Well, it started about 10 years ago. I am from Omaha, Nebraska, and I moved here in 2010 to Boulder, Colorado. And right before I moved here, I was finishing school at the University of Nebraska and got really interested in horticulture. I got interested in Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. I got interested in where food comes from, and someone took me mushroom hunting along the Platte River in, 2008, 2009. And I was immediately hooked. And from there, when I moved to Boulder, I immediately joined the Colorado Mycorrhizal Society, which kind of helped me fall down the rabbit hole even further. Basically, I'm interested in finding wild food, mostly mushrooms, medicine, mushrooms, and showing people how to find that in the wild as well.
Yep, cool. So my history, how I met him is 2 springs ago, I signed up for one of his FORAYS, and it was probably the most fun I've ever had with mushrooms. Like, we were slaying oyster mushrooms, and I went there to find morels, which we didn't find any morels, but he taught me, all about the habitats on where to find them. And the following spring, I was lucky enough to find some blonde morels that I actually cloned them. I'm trying to cultivate them.
Really?
So yeah, I've got a patch going in the backyard. Maybe I'll show you that after this. But it's really exciting, and I grow one of those oyster varieties as well. It's probably our 3rd most productive strain, and it's local to Colorado. So I'll never forget that day, and it meant a lot to me. And he introduced me into the world of foraging, where previously, all my mushroom skills had just been in the lab, but I feel like it's just as fun to go out there into the wild and, find some mushrooms. So someone says they have 28 half-gallon jars of liquid morel spawn. All right, so now you just got to find a good spot.
Yeah. What are you gonna do with it, Chili Dog? I'm interested in knowing that. I have friends that want to plant orchards, and that's one thing I've heard you can do is taking that spawn, creating a slurry, dipping root balls in there, and planting orchards, saying a Hail Mary, and then hopefully, there's a field of mushrooms at the end. I know that's how they do sometimes in truffles in the old country. And I know that that's one theory on growing morels in
Yep. So there's been a lot of research in the past 3 years. In China, there's a paper online, and they use a trench technique. I think it's a Morchella esculata. So it's a black morel, not a blonde morel, but they have been successful at digging trenches, spawning it, and then in like a hoop house setting or something, they've been able to fruit morels. Cool. So I'm not too sure on that, but it sounds like he has a lot of land and a lot of experiments.
Where are you located at, Chili Dog? I'm interested in knowing. because it's all relative to where you are. It's all regional. Kind of, you know, in Colorado, we look for several tree species associated with morels. In Nebraska, where I'm from, different species of morels, or trees associated with those morels. So it kind of all depends on where you're at, and I would check with your local mycological society. Wisconsin. I don't think you need any help growing morels in Wisconsin. I'm not sure, in my opinion, if cultivating them makes a lot of sense. But
possibly,
I don't know.
If you can find them without bugs, then no. But I feel like the only advantage for cultivating wild species is you'll be able to, you know, jump on those mushrooms before the bugs get them.
That's fair. Also, it will be contained in one location instead of having to go find them.
Yep.
But I've also heard, since morels are hollow, proper morels are hollow all the way through, there doesn't seem to be a lot of weight, so maybe it's not worth the input from a farmer's perspective. But again, I'm not a farmer.
Yep, we shall see.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of market for the spawn that you have, chili dog. I think if you wanted to try and sell that, there are people who would want to put that in their yard. I don't know if I would, but
yep,
definitely would be an interesting experiment.
Cool. It's kind of the fringe.
Yeah.
So one of I don't know, do you want to touch on the turkey tail? So if you guys watched my previous video, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 weeks ago, I had a video on creating this plug spawn. So Michael was kind enough to send me some turkey tail, some wild turkey tail specimen, and then I cloned that, and I have a petri dish here and liquid culture here that you can have of this. It's a native Nebraskan turkey tail mushroom, and he wanted me to make these plug spawns. I don't know if you want to get into that story at all.
Sure. So my mom lives in Nebraska, that's where I'm from, and we had to take down one of her trees this year because it was in danger of, you know, destroying her roof and her neighbor's roof. So I had a friend of mine, Greg, come out and chop it down. I didn't feel like spending the money on getting him to take the root or the stump out. So I thought I would do that, and I went out there with a chainsaw and broke the chain within 4 seconds. So I decided perhaps there was another method of taking this stump down. So I noticed at a stump nearby that my mom had some turkey tail, some Tremedus versicolor growing in the yard. So I harvested it, and I thought to myself, my buddy Gary could probably clone this sucker for me. I've cloned turkey tail before. I did it in a lab in California, which was really cool. So I knew it was possible. I thought it would be a cool idea to bring the specimen back to the yard and try mycorremediate the stump and get some medicine out of in the process. I don't know if it's going to work very well on a maple stump. I originally wanted to do like a lion's mane, but fuck it, we're going to try it.
Yeah,
you know?
I think it will. This is a super rigorous strain compared to my previous turkey tail. You can see, I mean, it's just overflowing with growth, and you know, they're pretty deep plugs, so I think that it will take off as long as there's no previous fungi that are growing. Even this one will probably overtake it.
Yeah.
But someone asked about cultivating it indoor, so I cultivate that just like any other oyster mushroom. It's pretty easy to fruit. The only difference is that it takes a really long time. So it could take anywhere from 4 to 6 months before you get a really nice shaped turkey tail. So that's kind of my tip, is just be patient.
Would you say that all of the woodier conch type mushrooms take longer like that?
Yeah. So reishi, turkey tail,
Cool.
any kind of polypore.
Yeah.
It just takes longer than normal.
Yeah, if you've ever come across one or touched one, they're super dense and woody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you would never want to eat one but they do make delicious tea.
Yep.
And I'm excited because we're gonna take this and we're gonna take it and drill holes in the stump. It's probably like 6 feet across. And then I have more maple, some silver maple that we're gonna just mulch over the top. And I'll probably do that next, maybe in the middle to late March, so that as the spring is heating up, the moisture's hitting it, we've got that humidity and hopefully by the end of summer, maybe we see some fruit.
Cool.
You know?
Yeah, I feel like that's a pretty good timeline.
Cool. And then hopefully we get a bunch of medicine out of it and I can build a garden around it. You know?
Cool. Well, that's really exciting,
Yeah,
and
it's
you
pretty
know,
cool.
I feel like those kind of stories are, you know, very inspirational and just cool to, you know, be in a community where everyone can help each other out. And
Very cool.
I really enjoy being in like the mushroom community here in Denver. Have you tried growing Matsutake? So yeah, I grew Matsutake a couple times. It also takes a really long time. So I usually do like small batches here and there. But what are your thoughts on Matsutake? Have you found any in Colorado?
I haven't found it here. I don't think it grows here. I don't think it's native here. It's a very dry climate. What I think about Matsutake is I think East Coast, I think humid environments, I think, you know, even Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa, I think has Matsutake. But I've never found it in Colorado. Maybe somebody else has, but it's hen of the woods, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never found it, but I see pictures of it on Instagram, and it's really a pretty, when you see a big one, you're just pretty blown away by it.
Yeah, so my experience is out of a 5-pound block, maybe I got half a pound. So it wasn't worth, you know, 4 months for fruiting for me, but I haven't tried it in probably a year now. So it could be the strain, or it would be ideal to find a local strain so that it's adjusted to the climate. That's kind of my thoughts.
I enjoy eating them. Anytime I see them in the store, I've never seen, at least locally in Colorado, I've never seen them farmed in a way that is like, wow, I want to buy that.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen it in other markets, like, you know, in California, I've seen Matsutake where I'm like, wow, look at that, you know, but I've never really come across it here, like at a Whole Foods or whatever.
Yep, it's kind of a tricky one.
It's tasty. It's a good, versatile mushroom.
So if anyone out there is foraging around during this time of year, are there any, you know, hot spots where you would go foraging this time of year, or are there any mushrooms that can withstand the colds of winter? Like, what is your thoughts on that?
So when we get into teaching about foraging, we start to discuss how you differentiate the various categories of mushrooms. And for simplistic terms, there's 4 categories. You have your saprophytic, mycorrhizal, parasitic, and you have your endophytic. And so the first one was saprophytic. Those are the kinds that you can grow. Oysters, Matsutake, turkeytail, these are the ones that are digesters. These are the ones that find a host. They're not necessarily parasitizing the tree or the plant, but they are living with that plant. The mycorrhizals are the ones that you find in the woods. These are, you know, arguably like a morel is a mycorrhizal, porcini, chanterelles, the ones that you see in the farmer's market or at the store that are really expensive.
Yeah,
because
those are the best.
There's like a tiny window every year for you to find them, because they don't grow, you can't grow them in a farm setting.
Yep.
And then you have your parasitic, which behave a lot like saprophytic. And then you have your endophytic, which are the ones that we don't even see. These are the ones that live inside of the plant or the organism. And so to answer your question, to get to the answer of your question, I've been hiking in Boulder. I live in Boulder, and there's a great hike called Mount Sanitas. It's a famous Boulder hike. I've been there in February, coming down along Sunshine Canyon, and looked on the ground on a stump, and I've seen a giant oyster mushroom.
Wow.
So the point of me saying that is saprophytic mushrooms, it doesn't require a season. It requires a condition, right? Mm-hmm. So sunny, you know, the tree is fully inoculated, the fruiting conditions are there, the moisture is there, boom, you'll see the fruit. So you can see oysters year round. if you are paying attention and the weather is permitting it. I hope that was a short enough answer for you guys.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Did you have some questions?
Yeah, someone said the forest that you might be targeting, old growth, woods of the near me, very strong. So old growth versus new growth forest.
So I'm not 100% sure if we have old growth or new growth in Colorado.
Yeah.
I think that's more of a Pacific Northwest. But I don't know the answer to that. I would imagine that a healthy forest will have mycelium growing anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah, because I think you could find burn morels in, you know, a ravaged forest that doesn't even have trees, and then, you know, a really young forest might have more like field mushrooms, like agaricus or something.
Yeah, it's I would say more important than whether it was old or new is how healthy is the forest. You know, 90% of the Earth's plants have a mycorrhizal relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking for a healthy forest, and chances are you'll find mushrooms there.
Yeah.
You know.
So someone asked about lobster mushroom.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know the time of year or ideal locations.
So lobster mushroom, to give you a background, is a parasitic mushroom, technically, but it starts off as one of 2 species of mushrooms in Colorado. When I answer these questions, these are all regionally specific to where we live. Like I said at the beginning, mushrooms grow with different species everywhere, so you just have to kind of pinpoint where you are and go from there. So to answer your question about lobsters, first and foremost, they're a parasitic mushroom. They're bright orange, they look like lobsters, they taste like lobsters, they're amazing. They start off as either a Lactarius species or a Rusula species, and I think those two share a family somewhere. But what happens is the lobster, its Hypomyces lactiforum, will come into the environment via spore in the atmosphere. It'll find a host, a Lactarius mushroom, which is an amazing edible mushroom growing here in Colorado. It is then going to find a mate. The other spore will find a mate. They will reproduce, make a mycelium, and engulf this Lactarius mushroom. And then it will turn it morphologically into a totally different mushroom. Whereas Lactarius or a Rusula, people would argue are marginally tasty. I would say that once it is converted from that mushroom into a lobster mushroom, it becomes a totally amazing culinary mushroom that is suitable for anyone with a shellfish allergy or doesn't necessarily know if they like lobster, or, you know, is a vegetarian and doesn't want to do fish or shellfish.
Yeah,
so.
I love lobster mushrooms. I like slicing them really thin and doing like a broth or some kind of like crust with it.
Yeah.
It gives it that briny flavor.
So to answer the question, like what kind of forest or where would you find, or what environment would you find a lobster mushroom? So I've found them in mixed conifer forests. I've found them in the Platte Ranger District, 8,500 feet. We're looking at a mix of aspen and Doug fir and probably some pine in there. And you're looking for where you're gonna find Lactarius deliciosa, or you're gonna find a Rusula species. And those are pretty prolific if you can figure out where they are gonna be. Like, you just find the associated tree species and then go there, if that makes any sense.
Cool. So how long does it take for a lobster mushroom to form? Is it gonna be like late season or?
Okay, so I don't know the answer, but I just know that when you start to see, let's take for example, a Rusula mushroom, and I see them often in July. So it probably takes 5 days for a Rusula to be, I'm guessing, I have no scientific background in this, I'm just guessing. Based on the short window of being able to find these mushrooms, I'm guessing that it probably takes 5 days, 3 to 5 days for a mushroom to go from the egg stage to a fully, formed Rusula. And then it's probably hanging out for a while before it gets parasitized. So then I don't know how long that will take, but I imagine it has to do its thing where it, somehow myceliates the mushroom
Yeah.
before it can produce a fruit. I
So
don't really
probably
know
a couple
how.
weeks, because this took about, a week or two to colonize.
Yeah, I would love to actually know. If somebody knows the answer, that would be great. I'm
Yeah.
really just shooting from the hip.
Yeah, but that's an interesting thing. So someone asked if the lobster mushroom can parasitize a toxic mushroom instead of like a Russula species.
So you can probably Google Hypomyces lactiflorum, because I doubt it stays specific to Lactarius or Russula. In other words, I'm sure it parasitizes other mushrooms. So the chance that it might, parasitize a deadlier mushroom might be out there. I've never heard of one. I've seen Hypomyces parasitize a porcini before. So I don't know. It's possible. The answer, I guess, is it's possible.
Yeah. So how do you verify that you're picking, lobster mushrooms and?
Well, so lobster specifically is a parasitized Russula or Lactarius, and it looks morphologically, it's unmistakable.
Yeah. So it would look completely different if it was.
I couldn't imagine, so there's maybe 7 deadly mushrooms in Colorado, maybe, I don't know. And several of them live in the Amanita genus, some of them are in the Galerina. Neither of those, to me, if they were parasitized by a lobster mushroom, would be confusing to me, because those have very specific phenotypes.
Yep.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
and so if it were to be parasitized, it would still look like maybe an orange, Amanita or an orange Galerina. It wouldn't, to me, it wouldn't be confusing.
Yep.
Or it'd probably be confusing.
Yeah.
But I just wouldn't be like, oh, this must be a mushroom. You're gonna
Yeah.
eat this. And I actually, to answer maybe the next question that comes up about it, I don't know if it changes its poison. I can't imagine. I don't know if it changes the muscarine toxins or the Galerina, whatever the toxins are in that. I don't know if it changes those.
Yeah.
There's a whole science behind it that is pretty still fresh.
Yeah. So someone asked about cultivating. Howdy from Oregon.
Hi,
But
JP.
someone asked about cultivating lobster mushrooms. I would think that it would be super difficult because first you have to get the Russula, which I don't know if that is.
So these are mycorrhizal mushrooms.
Yeah.
You would have to be able to grow them, and I don't know of anyone growing those mushrooms.
No, it would probably be very difficult, but I don't think that anything's impossible. I mean, if you could replicate a forest inside of a lab and then bring in the right spores, maybe you could grow it, but it probably wouldn't be worth it.
I'm sure there's an expert out there on the Hypomyces who can tell us. I actually don't know the answer to that. I know why you would want to do that, and I think it would be cool to figure out how you could, turn something into a lobster. One.
Or if you could put it on a chestnut mushroom or a
Something
fiappini, that'd be cool.
Maybe we'll do some experimenting this year if we find any lobsters.
Yeah.
I fully don't understand the chemistry or the biology behind it, but I'm sure we could figure it out.
Yeah. Sounds like a fun project. Cool. All right. Well, so as far as foraging for this season, I know that you don't like to schedule out too far just because of the weather patterns and stuff, but maybe, do you have a normal schedule that you would follow throughout the year, or what are your thoughts on, there's been a lot of burns from last year's forest fires. When should you start thinking about foraging in Colorado? And, someone asked about field guides, but I just, rely on this guy here. But maybe some of these questions you could start touching into.
Sure. So specific, again, to Colorado, the Rocky Mountains, the Front Range, I will find morel mushrooms as early as April 15th, April 3rd in Boulder County, which is cool. I think that's awesome. And then I have like various locations where I will go to in the beginning part of the season to kind of gauge where we're at. So a lot of the reason to back up a little bit to Gary's point about not wanting to schedule these too far in advance, a lot of this will depend on how much rain and snow did we get leading up to the foray. You know, last year was a really rough year as far as foraging was concerned in Colorado. I had to cancel several classes because I just wasn't seeing anything. So to give you a general tip on finding mushrooms in Colorado, you will find morels as early as April. Again, oysters can be found year-round, assuming the conditions are correct. Morels will continue through May, and all the way I've seen them in September. And they will start in lower elevations, so flat prairie, riparian areas, cottonwoods, look for water. You'll also find asparagus and oysters growing in a very similar environment. And as the temperatures heat up and you get further up in elevation, you'll start to see different morels growing. So May, you'll see blonde morels growing in Boulder. Later in June, you'll find black morels growing in the same county, but at 2,000 feet higher in elevation with different mushroom or different tree species.
Wow.
And then as the season warms up and the mountains start to wake up, June, July, August, September, that's when mushroom season starts to pick up. Late July, early August is by far my favorite time of year to mushroom hunt. I'm usually up above 8,500 feet, usually in an Engelmann Spruce forest looking for porcinis, or I'll go to a lodgepole pine forest, look for Matsutake, or I'll go to a mixed conifer forest like the one I was telling you about in the Platte and look for chanterelles, lobsters, you know. I found white boletes in the same area. I found, they're called Boletus barosi, and they're literally the same mushroom. They're just white.
Wow.
Which is really cool.
Do they taste the same?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, they taste like a porcini, like there's that earth steak, like rich boldness, but it's white. It's totally crazy.
Wow,
yeah.
that's super
It's great.
cool.
I did a bunch of cool stuff, like drying them and making soups, and it was pretty cool. Yeah, that was a great year.
Someone asked about ground temperature. Do you think that's a big factor?
I do, and at first, when I first started hunting for morels in Omaha, that was the first thing people told me about. They told me, you know, when the lilacs bloom, look for the mushroom. And then I also heard, bring a meat thermometer, and it's, you know, 50 degrees, the soil reaches 50 degrees, then it's suitable for mushroom growth. I think that holds. The way I've done it, or the way I've figured out when mushrooms are happening in our area, just morels specifically, is that I look at the cottonwoods that are associated with them, the Great Plains cottonwood, and the leaf is what I look at. So, and my theory is that the larger the leaf, the more activity in the tree, right? So the tree is alive, it's producing sugars. We all know that there's that mycorrhizal relationship between the mycelium and the tree. So I just think that the action is starting. And so you can tell when the soil is above 50 degrees, I feel like the whole forest is starting to wake up. That means that there's enough sugar coming from the sun, the mushrooms can start to produce their thing. So I usually look for, you know, a cottonwood leaf to be about an inch and a half. And then you'll know you're specifically like in that sweet spot for morels.
Cool. So that's a pro tip right here. You heard it first from this guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what about for chanterelles and porcini? Like, are there any tips that you look for those guys?
So again, with the mycorrhizal mushrooms, it's every time I take a group into the woods, I'm usually teaching them about trees and plants first, in the sense that I'm saying, okay, so if you want to find a porcini in Rocky Mountains of Colorado or New Mexico or even in Canada, you want to find its associated plant. And so here, specifically in Colorado, the Boletus rubriceps or the Boletus, edulis is the other one. The two porcini, and then the Barosi is different. It has a different associated plant. But if you are going to find those two porcini mushrooms, you are going to look for a specific tree. That tree is the Engelmann Spruce. Okay, well, where do you find that? Well, if you start to understand the ecology of that spruce tree, you understand that it grows anywhere from 7,500 feet to 11,000 feet. It grows on the north-facing side of any mountain, generally, because that's where more of the moisture is. And so you would go to that forest during the season that you expect porcinis to be growing. And in where we live, again, Colorado, the season I've seen porcinis growing as early as July 2nd. I've seen them growing as late as September 10th.
Wow.
So the window just depends on a lot of different, environmental variables that we can never control for. I mean, not on a micro level.
Yeah, very cool.
So, and then chanterelles are another story. That's a July through September. I found them as late as like September 14th before. And you're going to look for the forests that will sustain those mushrooms. So it's a mixed conifer forest. So I found them near, where is it? Evergreen, Colorado is a great place to go looking for them.
Cool.
I really like, that 8,000 foot area. I found them in a mix of, pine and aspen generally.
Cool.
And there's two types of chanterelles that grow in Colorado that I know of. Cantharellus roseocanis and Cantharellus siberius are the two that I know of.
And those are both amazing.
Yes, it's true. Chanterelle is one of my favorites to cook with.
Question about cannabis and cubensis. So,
the answer to your question is, so are we talking about psychedelic mushrooms? That's a saprophytic mushroom. It is a secondary decomposer. It requires a very specific chemistry because it's a secondary decomposer. It comes in after other things have done their work, like a primary decomposer, like a reishi or an oyster. And then the secondary decomposers come in and start to break it down. And anyway, I doubt you would be able to grow it on a cannabis tree, but I mean, you would be a rich person if you were able to pull it off.
yeah, I think there's a girl, Herbal Visions, and check out her Instagram because she covers this topic. I believe that was her goal, is to, have them symbiotic relationship, but I'm, not too familiar. And it might be possible just like everything else, but I don't think there's any specific studies on that. And then someone had mentioned about getting mold in a jar. So if you ever get mold in your spawn jar, you should just discard that. Don't try to get rid of the mold. Someone said that, or asked about a UV light or something, but it's not gonna be effective because it's gonna be in the inside of the jar, and that could wreak havoc on a grow. So if you
Keep it closed.
yeah,
at all costs.
yeah. So get rid of that as soon as you can, and don't try to save it. The trick for growing mushrooms is just starting clean and carrying that cleanliness all the way through. But at least, take it as a learning experience. And when I started out, I had a pretty large compost pile filled with mold.
It's true. It is not your friend.
Yep. Poisonous mushrooms have to. So,
Oh,
rules for not getting poisoned while you're hunting. So I'm gonna start off by saying that I don't pick any mushrooms that I don't know are exactly what I'm looking for, and the more you do it, the more you become familiar. So someone else is responding to that question, but what is your thoughts on poisonous mushrooms and any good rules?
yeah. I have some thoughts, and I'm sure you've heard this in any region that you're from. There are old mushroom, and also I think this applies to like climbers and other sects of people who are weird like us. But there are old mushroom hunters and there are bold mushroom hunters, but there are no old and bold mushroom hunters is the general rule of thumb. If you guys remember a guy by the name of Gary Linkoff, he wrote the Audubon Society book on mushrooms, used to be the head guy at the New York Botanic Gardens. He had this really funny line once at the Telluride Mushroom Festival. I remember seeing him speak there once, and somebody asked that question, well, what's the rule, you know? And his answer was, you can eat any mushroom at least once. So I always take comfort knowing that you could eat a poison mushroom and die. You can still do it. But the point is you don't want to do that, right? So the answer is that there is no one rule, except for, you know, Gary says, you know, he won't pick it if he doesn't know it. I would say there are no, you know, don't pick any mushrooms with red, or don't pick any mushrooms with a ring. Like, there's no one rule. But I would just say, if you want, you get yourself a field guide, you join a mycological society, or you get with some friends who have a little experience under their belt, and then you just start going through the field guide. There's the dichotomous keys that are critical in developing the skills of observation. Anymore, I think there are even DNA test kits you can buy, like Pocket DNA. I think there's a company I follow on Instagram that literally you can sequence in the field with a pocket sequencer. But there's no like 100% way to know unless you're with somebody who's been doing it for a long time. And then you just got to be super careful and make sure you're, you know, 100% confident. But there's no rule of thumb, you know, don't eat this mushroom because it does this. But there are certain things you'll want to know for your region. So if you're in California or again Missouri, you'll want to actually study the poisonous mushrooms as much as you're going to want to study the edible ones. You know, because there's a tiny mushroom that grows here that, you know, might be an inch tall. The Galerina marginata or autumnalis, I don't know what name they use now, but it is like maybe this big, and one dose of that, your body shuts down, and 48 hours you're done. Wow. You know, or you're on some sort of kidney dialysis. The whole point is to have fun and to not, you know, kill yourself or your friends. You know.
Yeah. So for those of you guys that are joining in late, this is Michael Heim from Enzo Farm and Forage. So someone asked where they would get more information on you. Just to do a plug, It seems like there's a lot of people joining in.
I made a thing for you guys to see. I feel pretty proud about it. So here's a little information for you. I don't know if you can read that, guys, but I'm Michael at enzofarmandforage.com. Or find me on Instagram at Enzo Farm and Forage.
Yep, and then it's in the description of this video too.
Cool.
So, all right, and then someone else asked, here, let's go back.
Yeah, let's see some questions. What do you got?
So, how important is it to use organic? Pesticides don't seem great to eat. So, I agree with that. You know, we want to stay away from pesticides. LBM dead. All right, little brown mushroom, truffles. So
there are truffles in the area. I don't know if they're prized.
Yep.
I found one time I found a truffle.
How did you find that?
A long story. My comrade that I was with had locked his keys in his car, and I was upset, so I let him deal with figuring out how to get our car, how we could get our keys. So I was just gonna take a nap in the field. And as I was laying there, I found some strawberries. Oh, that was neat. I ate some strawberries. I saw this tuber on the ground. I was like, what is that? That's weird. So I collected it, and then I drove home, you know, kind of fussing about the keys and having to wait an extra 2 hours before I could go home. But I remember just like staring at this tuber the whole way home, cutting it in half, and then throwing it in my garden. And then days later, I realized that I had like a local truffle.
Wow.
You know, they grow in California. They grow all over. It's just a matter of whether or not they're prized for eating.
So what are the most prized? Because I see a lot of these like Chinese vendors that are trying to sling truffles.
Yeah.
Like, what do you have to look out for?
So there is, oh man, tuberosum melanosporum, maybe, I can't remember. There's Italian and French are the ones that are prized. The black truffle or the white truffle. Specifically Umbria, Italy is the spot, or Burgundy, France is another spot. And every year around Christmas, New Year's, you'll see the boutique places selling them. There's a great place in San Francisco and Santa Cruz. I think they have a farm. It's called Far West Fungi. I'm sure everybody knows about them. But they have a kiosk in the ferry building, and you can go in there, and they have, like a glass case with the lid, and you pull it up, and there's a $200 an ounce, truffle. But again, to circle back, it's just, do people enjoy them? And if they do, then they're valuable, right?
Cool.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I have a clone truffle that I got from, it was embedded in some cheese, and I cloned it, and it's on agar, but I haven't grown it out. Using organic soy hulls, I believe you mean. So my experience is that most byproducts, like agricultural byproducts, they won't go through the process to get their substrates certified organic, because it's quite a rigorous process. I think the more important thing is to just know where you're sourcing your substrate. So we try to get everything local. We just ordered a bunch of pellets that were from an Amish company. So the Amish people were making pellets by hand, and it came from oak trees. And as long as you can trace back your substrate to the beginning, I believe that it doesn't necessarily have to be organic, but organic is a prime standard. But I am not certified organic. I use organic ingredients, but it's a huge process to go through to have your system completely audited. You have to pay in money to get your product organic certified, but you can have a non-certified product that's organic. I just am not there yet in my business, but it is something important to keep in mind. Mushrooms, if there's fungicides on your substrate, are going to have a difficult time growing.
It's true.
Yep.
And you're going to want a consistent supply of substrate.
Yep. So applying that to foraging, are there any key areas, or would you stay away from certain areas if do you think that mushrooms will suck in pollution, or
yeah. So the Paul Stamets talks about this a little bit in Mycelium Running, his great book. He talks about hyperaccumulation, and it's like kind of a great thing for cleaning up a site, for example. He has a few examples in his book about just pouring in his crankshaft oil into a block of oysters, and days later it's producing fruit. It's a really interesting idea. The things that I would worry about is if I am foraging near a mine, which is common in Colorado and in a lot of the mountain states. I'm pretty aware whether or not I'm near a mine, or I've heard stories of people not foraging just below a highway, because the yellow lines that they paint on the highways still, they are lined with lead still. So people worry about the runoff coming down the hill.
Yeah, I never thought about that.
And so, an example of what I'm trying to tell you is the first thing that grew after Chernobyl was a mushroom, right? And so they are resilient, they will grow, and they will convert things. I think the cool thing about mycoremediation is that they can convert carbon into lower forms of carbon, breaking down the petrochemicals. So stay away from unclean areas, much like you wouldn't, harvest greens in a polluted, I don't know, interstate off-ramp, you probably wouldn't do the same thing if you were harvesting mushrooms near a disgusting like gold mine or something.
Yeah. My advice is to err on the side of caution, and if you're questioning it, then probably leave it.
Yeah. They hyper accumulate. They can collect lead, toxins, metals for miles. So it's something you want to consider.
Yeah. All right. So there's
more questions.
A few questions coming in. Tried Matsutake.
Yes.
So that's a really good mushroom.
So the question says, have you ever tried Matsutake? I know it's mainly West Coast, and a lot of Asians have been poisoned by mistaking Destroying Angel by Matsutake, or by mistake.
Yes.
So I believe the Destroying Angel was found in Colorado 7 times, 2 summers ago in Aurora in somebody's backyard. It is a mushroom that I'm pretty sure has a ring, and it's not something I would mistake for Matsutake, and I'll tell you why. Matsutake is a very special looking mushroom. It grows under the soil, under this duff, and the smell is what is the thing that pretty much defines it for me. So David Aurora, the famous field guide, mycologist, writer, funny fella, he described the smell as a combination of gym socks and Red Hots, like the cinnamon candy. It's an unmistakable smell, and when you find a Matsutake, and they do grow here in Colorado, I have found several honey holes. It is quite an experience, and you will never ever forget the smell of a Matsutake. I don't believe the Destroying Angel has that smell. I'm 100% sure it doesn't, nor do I think I would get confused. But the general rule of thumb is if you have that question, is this a Matsutake or a Destroying Angel, then you have to call someone.
Yeah,
you can't
just leave it behind.
You have to either you have to find out before you eat that.
Yep. That's why this guy's here.
Yeah.
What flush take a clone? All right, so they're talking about cultivation. What flush would I take a clone from? So I don't think it matters what flush. It just matters on the integrity of the mushroom. You don't want a moldy mushroom. You don't want a deformed mushroom. Just take the best looking mushroom and clone that one. That's what I would say. All right, so let's go back to the chats. Aerobic compost. All right, I don't know what they're trying to add.
I don't think the answer on the Cortinarius, is that what he's talking about? Or
Militaris.
it's the
Cordyceps militaris.
cordyceps, yeah. I don't think it'll infect anything.
I don't think it's infectious, but I'm not an expert on infecting fields. I don't know, but I don't think it would.
No, I would say that if anything, the myceliated bags of spent substrate would be great for a field. I have a friend, Amanda, who has a farm in Boulder, and when I was growing mushrooms on that farm under Boulder High Country Mushrooms, we would take the spent substrate and fertilize her cabbage, and to this day she still wants those bags because the difference in the cabbages between ones that were used with the substrate and ones that weren't, totally different.
Yep. So shout out Mossy Creek Mushroom, welcome. They said that it's pretty hard to spread the honey mushrooms too, and recently I got these Agricide Parasitica, which I reached out to Trad Cotter, and he told me that the likelihood of these spreading to native strains is very low, so I'm not too worried about that. But it doesn't hurt to just think about these concepts, but I think that a lot of people exaggerate, especially like a honey mushroom, like cultivating those and then that spreading to trees. So what is your thoughts on a healthy tree being exposed to a wild mushroom? Like,
I would say if I would do my best to not to put a parasitic mushroom. I would just not do anything with them.
Yeah.
I would just leave them be and let them do. But I can understand why you would be worried. You know, the cordyceps is a parasitic mushroom that infects the brain of insects. Other parasitic mushrooms like the honey mushroom, the Armillaria osteoiae, or however you say it, infects the aspen tree specifically. Yeah. So I don't see the crossover happening. But if I were going to say anything, I would probably echo
err the side of caution.
Just be cautious. You know, you don't want to put a potentially detrimental organism into a scenario and then be the one responsible for, you know, destroying a forest.
Yeah. So be cognizant.
Yeah. I think the other thing is the largest organism on the planet is a honey mushroom, so that's probably another reason why people are afraid of spreading it.
Yeah, it just has this stigma around it. I've never even eaten a honey mushroom, so...
They grow in Colorado. It is the largest organism in the world, maybe, I think. It's called, it's in Western Oregon. I think you can see it from, 10,000 feet. Anyway, yeah.
Cool. So what are your thoughts on morels being parasitic versus saprophytic? There's pretty big debate on that.
I would say the line that straddles between the two would be more saprophytic versus mycorrhizal.
That's true.
So I think where you're headed is after a burn.
Yep.
We see a whole bunch of morels popping up, specifically Morchella tomentosa, I think, and a couple other of the black burn morels. You see them popping up after a fire if the conditions are right, and I think my theory behind it, and I should corroborate this, but it's very similar to when plants bolt. So for example, you got arugula in your yard and it gets so hot one day that the shoot, the flower just goes boop, and it's like, we got to reproduce, we got to get our seed out. I think similarly after a fire, the mushroom, the morel, the organism's like, ooh, we don't have a host to work with right now. It got totally wiped out. We got to get our seed up and we got to move to the next forest. So they pop up out of the soil when spring hits, when their moisture is right and when the temperature of the soil is right, and they pop up out of the soil and they take their bags and they move elsewhere.
Cool.
So the difference between a saprophytic mushroom and a mycorrhizal is very evident. Saprophytic, sapros in Greek meaning putrid, dead, rotting, phytic meaning plant. So these are fungus that find their host in a cottonwood, for example, that got broken open by a wind or something. And mycorrhizal are the kind that find their relationship. For example, the root structures of the trees syncing up with the mycelial network of a morel. And I think what I've heard is that morels straddle the line between saprophytic and mycorrhizal, because for whatever reason, you'll find a lot of morels in where I'm finding them is near broken down cottonwood trees. So I don't know if that has to do with saprophytic or mycorrhizal. I don't really know.
All right.
I don't even know if that answered your question.
Yeah,
either.
the debate is still there. Oh, we got a super chat question from Michael.
Oh God.
Do you see a pretty wide variety of phenotypes of oysters in the wild, or are they all looking pretty similar to each other?
So I would say, generally speaking, yes, they all look pretty close to each other. I'd say the variety comes in the length of its stock, its middle, like its girthiness, whether it's scrawny or stocky, big like a trumpet, or the color, right? So like the tropical oysters, like the blue and the pinks, those are obviously different color, but if you look at them and you strip the color away, they'd be the same basic phenotype. I hope that answered your question. I don't know.
Changes between the girth of the stem and then color changes. So I'm gonna piggyback on that. So when I met Michael and we went foraging, we collected probably, 15 pounds of different oyster mushrooms, and I cloned 2 or 3 different segments of what appeared to be the same oyster, just, on a couple different trees. And out of those different phenotypes that I cloned, one of them produced amazing, and then the other 2 were, mediocre, not so good. But in the wild, like, to me, it looked, almost the same. So I feel like when you're transferring those oysters into like a cultivation setting, maybe there's different genes that are triggered when you're cultivating indoors compared to out in the wild.
Yeah, it's interesting what happens, I'm sure.
Yeah, and like, what are your thoughts on like different phenotypes throughout the year? Like, is the same oyster mushroom going to flush like a bunch of different times, or is it like one mushroom will flush when it's cold, and then a different species of almost this, or like a different interspecies will flush at like summer, and then like what are your thoughts on that?
I would say you would have to study that way more, but it would lend itself to a really cool, like, what's the word? Like, yeah, it would lend itself to a really cool system within your farm. I had thought in the past of just maybe you have your brown decomposers and your white decomposers and then your tertiary decomposers and playing off of those in a way. But as far as taking it interspecies and figuring out, oh, well, this time of year on this log, this mushroom will grow this, and then later in the year it'll grow that. I haven't done that work. I think that's worth checking out. I think it's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered any questions.
I don't know either, but it was cool to think about. All right, so let's see if we got any more questions. We got...
But I also know that environment affects growth as well, right? So, if you have too much CO2, obviously you're gonna get skinnier, little stringy little bastard mushrooms. And if you have a perfectly, enriched environment, you'll get a different outcome. So I think environment also makes a difference.
Yep. So someone asks, when trying a new mushroom, you should limit your intake just in case you have a reaction. How much of a bite would you consider as a trial? How long would you wait before larger amounts?
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's a great question. First, I'll premise it with, you cannot be poisoned by a mushroom unless you metabolize it. You can taste it, spit it out, you can smell it, you can do anything you want with it, but in order to get sick, you have to ingest it, you have to metabolize it. So, just so you know, you can't get poisoned by touching a mushroom in the wild.
Some people were always, like, when I remember being younger and, like, my aunt or someone, like, don't touch that mushroom because then you can, like, touch your fingers, but that's just a myth.
It is a myth. You would have to really consume, a lot of a mushroom in order for it to really do any damage. I'm not a doctor, so don't take me at my word. Personally, I've tasted deadly poisonous mushrooms and spit them right out. It's kind of a judgment call. So to answer the question though, they asked, there's a general principle when you're starting out at this and you're learning about it, and even for veteran pickers, like, I don't know if I'm a veteran at this point, but I've been doing it for 10 years. So what I know is that there are people, and the recommendation is if you're out mushroom hunting and you find what you think is an oyster mushroom, the idea is you're new at this, you don't exactly know, you've made a few calls, you reached out to me at my company, you've gone online, you've talked to a few people, you've kind of come to the conclusion, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is an oyster mushroom. It was growing on a tree, it has these details, and the spore print was creamy white or whatever your field guide and the experts are telling you. Then you make the decision, okay, I'm gonna make the decision I'm gonna risk it, and I'm gonna eat this thing that I found wild in the forest. And I'll just pause that right there and just kind of tell you something. One time I had a roommate that was like, no way, I would never eat something that you found in the forest. And in my head, I was thinking to myself, well, you go to the grocery store every single day and you buy product off the shelf you know, strawberries, raspberries, whatever, you don't know where that's coming from 100%, and you feel more confident buying something because it's in a package versus buying, like, eating something.
Actually seeing
it in its but anyway, so the general rule of thumb is to, once you've gotten to the point where you're like, I think this is an oyster mushroom and I want to try it, but I'm nervous, I would say take a little bit, you know, one mushroom, cook it, always cook mushrooms. That's always, I think 100% always cook mushrooms. Unless they're the dried concert variety. But go ahead and cook it in oil, low to medium heat, little salt at the end once you have some color, and then take the specimen that you found, the rest of it, put it, you know, paper bag, put it in your crisper, and let someone know that you are going to try a wild mushroom that you found. And generally, the idea is most people can tolerate the edible mushrooms. However, I will say there are people who don't tolerate certain mushrooms, and that's a real thing. So some people don't do well with the hawkswing mushroom. Some people don't do well with some of the russula species. But it's just all personally dependent on whether your body does well with it. Obviously, there are poisonous mushrooms you want to stay away from, but there are certain varieties of mushrooms that we eat generally, but some people don't tolerate them. So I would err on the side of eating a little bit at a time, storing it in the fridge, making sure somebody knows you're trying it, and then the next day, if you don't feel upset or, you know, you feel good, then I would go ahead and try and eat more if you want.
Yeah, so someone asked about chicken of the woods. So a friend of mine in Niagara Falls, New York, he was part of a community where one of the expert foragers had gotten really sick and actually passed away from a chicken of the woods that was infected with a bacteria. So I don't think it was a bad reaction to the mushroom, but I think he didn't cook it properly. So that kind of goes back to, you know, I don't know, but someone asked specifically about chicken of the woods, people being sensitive to that, and I've also heard that there were some trees that could create toxins with a chicken of the woods, so you have to be aware of what tree. This is general, you know, hearsay, so I have the expert here. What are your thoughts on chicken of the woods?
So it doesn't grow in Colorado. I've only found it once in Yosemite. I do not know. What is it?
Someone said Mossy Creek shout out. He's leaving, and he really enjoyed, you know, your conversation so
Thanks,
far.
guys.
So thanks for joining in.
So as far as chicken of the woods, I don't know much about that mushroom. I just know it's a showstopper when you find it in the woods.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about eating it or any sort of poisonous reactions from trees. So
Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of hearsay. I know a lot of people that love it and swear by it, but those are some of the top things that I've heard. There was another super chat from Bobble W. Most nutritious hardwood for the home grower. When do I forage in Grand County, and should I go next to the fire scars? So I'll answer the hardwood. I go with oak. If you can find oak, that's the best. And then time of year for Grand County, and should he go explore the fires? Like,
so I can't remember where. Actually Grand County. You're talking like the Cameron Peak fire, probably.
yeah.
I was driving through that area yesterday, trying to scope out possible trails for this year. My only experience with burn morels happened in the Kremling area a couple years ago. I remember being anywhere from 7,500 feet to 9,000 feet. I remember a totally crazy scenario of ashy forest with no leaves, no life, black toothpicks dotting the landscape, and then I just remember seeing black morels everywhere. So my suspicion is that the morel season, if there is going to be a burn morel season, is going to happen when any morel season would happen, which is what we talked about earlier. Is the soil temperature warm enough? Is there enough life in the, I guess that's different than what we talked about, but is the soil temperature good? Is there enough moisture? Was there a mycelial mat in the area to begin with? Those are the three things that I would consider. So Grand County, I think, hits all of those things. It's 8,000 feet. It just had some big fires, and I suspect there'll be burn morels there this year. I'm actually hopeful to get a couple permits if they're going to open up the forest. Hopefully the USFS will issue me some permitting for taking groups up there, which would be great.
Yeah, so check out his website, Enzo Farm and Forage. Keep checking in to see the schedule. It's gonna depend on the weather, but also enzofarmandforage@gmail.com. He's got an Instagram, Enzo Farm and Forage. It's all linked up to my Instagram too, so if you check that out, he's always posting. Well, he is always finding, not so much posting the spots, but always finding really cool mushrooms. And I appreciate everything that he's taught me. And I don't know, is there anything else that you'd like to cover?
Just so this year I plan on taking more groups out. Last year was kind of a bust. I think 2020 kind of took the legs out from a lot of us. This year I want to get more people out into the woods. I would like to offer more classes. Hopefully the weather and the moisture permits it. I've already got some good relationships going with the rangers on the Front Range, so I'm hopeful to build that up a little more. And then I just want to say that I'm going to offer an online, I haven't decided what to call it yet, but like a Rocky Mountain mushroom identification webinar. I haven't decided if I was going to charge or do like some sort of a donation, but the idea is maybe February 12th. Send me an email before then. I'll get you some details, but I was thinking of doing like a 75-minute like introduction to mushroom foraging in Colorado.
A little more structure than this conversation.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah, I got nothing else. Really.
All right. Well, that was a really good conversation.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks again for joining us. And, I'm looking forward to springtime. So once again, check this guy's website out. There's going to be signups. I'm sure they're going to be filling up quickly. So, all right, guys. Well, thanks for joining in on another Fungi Friday.
Thanks, dudes. It was really nice talking with y'all. Come back and visit me.
And if you have any questions on foraging, reach out to Michael Heim. But we'll keep everyone posted. As soon as he gets some schedules, I'll start
mid-May through mid-September. That whole time I'll be offering classes.
So. All right, there it is. Well, thank you guys, and until next time, much love.
Thanks, guys.